Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another JBDC Global Entrepreneurship Week production. Today, the world's biggest brand takes center stage as we present Brand Jamaica Design Lab. And we have with us today a panelist of esteemed guests, of designers in their own right, and really a wealth of knowledge in the gift and craft industry. And joining us today, we have Baugh, founder and creative lead of Baughaus Designs, and she will be addressing bridging the gap between design concepts and product development locally. We also have with us on stage Lisa Callender, founder and lead consultant and trained industrial designer from ProTradeConsult, and she will be talking to us on product development with an eye on export. And also on Zoom, we have with us Laura Lee Jones, Head of Department Acting for the Applied Arts School of the Visual Arts at the Edna Manley College. She is also an entrepreneur and owner of Studio L Designs. And she will be speaking to us on youth designers driving innovation in Brand Jamaica. To my left, we have Kris Jackson, a no stranger to the JBDC family, and also an entrepreneur in her own right, designer, and she will be speaking to us on blending contemporary designs with traditional art forms and culture. And we have to now look at, having discussed earlier this morning the value chain, we are going to be delving into the matter of design and just how important design is going to be to driving what we love to talk about as Brand Jamaica. How do we ideate, activate, and create an output that is tangible, that results in money? Our global entrepreneurship theme for this week is ideate, innovate, and activate. And certainly at the end of this discussion, we should be getting some guidance and some lead on how to do all three. We kickstart the discussion with our panelist, Baugh, and I'll just give a little brief preview of her profile. Savilamar, Jamaica is home to Baughaus Design Studio, a tiny studio that designs and makes Jamaican handmade ceramics, lighting, furniture, and soft goods for the home infused with Jamaican roots and culture. The pieces are clean and modern but warm at the same time, a true expression of tropical modern design for the home, typically pairing local materials such as Jamaican wood and clay with the natural beauty of very white porcelain. As a child, the lead designer and founder of Baughaus, Dana attended prep school on a farm with a beautiful beach at Paradise, Westmoreland. She marveled and fell in love with what surrounded her and uses this every day to create pieces that tell the story of Jamaica through her eyes. Dana has been creating for as long as she can remember, and her creative talents were encouraged by her family, which resulted in the desire to pursue a design-based business as her profession. Bauhaus loves making pretty things, and Janine loves pretty things, and hopes to share Jamaican culture globally through her products. Dana, welcome.
Hi, Janine.
Okay, so we're
Thank
going to
you.
You're most welcome. We're going to kickstart with, as a major player in the gift and craft industry, how would you describe the design process and how the process transitions to actual production?
Okay, so that's a very good question. It's very broad because the design process can be very personal and it can be different for a lot of people. So I thought about the topic a lot, trying to figure out what would give people a good idea of what I would go through and from what I learned at school for the whole idea of the design process, prototyping, and with a view on real life experience. So in terms of bridging the gap between the design, the entire design process from start to finish, I would say conceptualizing or coming up, that initial spark that you have is what I would call the inspiration point, where you start from. And typically, you can be inspired by anything. Most creatives or people who are entrepreneurs, they're problem solvers, and they use design thinking to come up with an idea and find a solution. And most designs are typically a response to your interaction with something. For me, I typically will work in several different mediums. Once I get inspiration, I'll immediately go to sketching it just to document it. One of the most important things is to document your idea, not just work in your head. Whether or not you're doing a piece of music or whatever it is, doesn't matter. If you're creating something, you have to document it. Most people will go to paper and pen and pencil or paint or whatever and sketch. There's some people who are more comfortable on a digital platform. They may use Illustrator or some kind of computer application to create a design, and that's fine. I think that you should work in whatever way is most comfortable to you. I think that we a lot of times forget that part about research. We come up with an idea, we head straight for it, and we don't research, we don't look at different types of production processes. I think that oftentimes we think that you are the creator or you are the designer, so you must also make it. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. But as the designer, when you're thinking about creating something, you have to think through to the end of the product, right? You know, who do you see this product being sold to? Is it for a mass market or is it a one-off piece? There are questions that you do need to ask yourself. And I know I'm on a short time period here, so I'm just trying to go through as quickly as I can because there are many different stages and things that I would like to touch on. But one of the things is to make sure that you research, see what other people are doing, see if the idea is already out there, and try to put your design perspective and your spin on it, or what it is that's personal to you as a creative or as the creator of the design. One of the other steps in the process that I would say that after I would come up with a concept and I may sketch it, or I may do a 3D mock-up of it, or I may just go straight into Illustrator. My process has changed over time. When I just started, I started out doing a lot in my computer applications, 3D Studio Max and AutoCAD. Now, because my pieces are more organic, I go straight into sculpting. So my process has evolved as I've gotten more confident as a designer and as a maker. So that's why I'm very fluid when I speak about a design process. I don't say that you should follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it has to be like that, because everybody is different. Once you do your design, you do your research. If you're not the maker, you really should have an understanding of your material and materiality, what that's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, some idea of the process. I think it's very important, if you're a designer, to have some understanding of whether or not it's different types of paper or different types of clay, or whatever it is, or whatever instrument you're using to create music. I think that you should have some knowledge of it. And if you don't, it's okay. You just have to get right into it and learn as much as you can about it and put yourself in that position to do that. I think that's very important. I did touch on a point about understanding who the product is going to be for and what purpose is it going to serve. And I just want to point out that that's also very important. A lot of people design in a bubble, and I tend to, when I'm designing, I think about the customer. A lot of times I align with, I design not necessarily for myself, but I may think that this person, or this will be a great gift, but how do I adjust it so it appeals to more people? When I started, I wanted to do everything in white and everything was more stark, because I went to design school in New York, and it has a different look, more urban. But when I came back home, a lot of people wanted to see color. And so I had to adjust, but I chose colors that I loved. So I found a happy medium where there are colors that I loved but appealed to the end consumer. So I think a part of the design process that a lot of times we may miss is including in your thought process who the product is for and who will it satisfy. A lot of times we think that, oh, this product is nice and I love it, and then you try to force that into the market. I'm not going to say that's wrong, because you can disrupt and you can create a totally new product, but also bear in mind that you should ask for feedback from someone who you trust, or who is similar to whoever your end consumer is going to be, and create with that in mind as well. So I think in between coming from the concept to creating the final product, those are a few of the things that I would apply to the product right before I get to the production stage, after I've gone through a lot of the thinking of who the customer is and so forth. I actually go into the prototyping, which is the sampling phase. And that is the phase where I get into the physical making of it, coming up with a sample. And when I'm designing, and my thinking has changed now, from when I just started to now being someone who has a functioning studio with machinery and equipment, now it's easier for me to go into the studio and just start something and create something a lot quicker. If you're just starting out, it may be a little bit, take a little bit more time to do that, because you may not have all the tools available. But when you are designing, if you've done your research and you know a little bit about the production process, when you're prototyping, you may adjust your design because the material may not do what you want it to do. So having an understanding of your material is very important. And once you know your material well enough, like I have learned from making a lot of mistakes in the past, I can just go straight into sculpting something or making something, and I design for what I know, how the material will respond to certain types of designs, like how far I can push the material and what type of glazing or finish I may do, because I know what the material will look like if I do certain things to it and manipulate it a certain way. So when you're designing, and my first experience of doing something like that was my latest dinnerware collection with the breadfruit collection, where I designed the glaze and designed the piece to have certain grooves and stuff in there, so that when I glazed it, the glaze would enhance the design of the piece. So started designing that way, thinking of how the material and the different elements will come together to form the final piece in production. And then when you get more into mass producing, you start thinking about, how do I replicate this thing? How do I create a mold? How do I go to a factory or whatever it is? But sometimes you think about, are there elements that I can remove, or elements that I can make faster, or I can use less material? Because then we go into the business side of a design-based business. So that's another area that I can expound on if anybody wants to talk about that a little bit more. But I think that that's the shortest summary I can give, from design to having a prototype and touching a little bit on the mass production of a product.
I think it's so critical what you just shared with us, Dana, because I think persons like myself, we like pretty things, and that's how we see it on the shelf. None of us really sit down and try to understand what that process is that you just described. And sometimes that makes us lose sight of the real value of what we are actually purchasing. So I think it was really important for us to start the conversation that way, because we need to set the context about when we say design, it's not just about coming up with pretty, attractive things. There is actually a technical process involved. And I like the fact that you spoke about the different stages. And and spoke about the fact that you also have evolved in your own right as a designer. So as you start, persons will find their footing. Now,
Exactly.
I move on to my next panelist, Lisa. In our last biz zone, we spoke a lot about case studies in gift and craft. And one of the key elements for success was that those countries targeted export. Now we know that export is a different kind of animal. So I'm going to just introduce Lisa first, and I'm just going to just go right into the question. Lisa Callender is a capacity building specialist and strategist. Through her consultancy firm, ProTradeConsult, she has helped shape several policy and strategy projects based on stakeholder consultations, including the National Craft Policy and Strategy Document of Jamaica. She has also conducted training workshops on new product development linked to export markets across the Caribbean, funded by the Caribbean Development Bank, the Caribbean Export Development Agency, and the Organization of American States FemCity Project. Trained to the MA level in industrial design with the support of a UK Chevening Fellowship between 1996 and 1998, Lisa maintains an experimental product development practice spanning the design of ceramics, textiles, metal, and paper objects. So we have definitely brought into our family skill sets and expertise and knowledge that's going to just help us to understand how to move this sector into export. Lisa, my first question, what are some of the considerations in looking to access export markets as a designer?
Okay, thank you, Janine. Good afternoon, everybody. Um, so everything that Dana said about product development and design being a process, export market development is also a process. And for many companies, even large companies, it's a process of trial and error. But I think for micro and small businesses, it's very important to be quite targeted and focused. The difference with many of our small businesses in the Caribbean begin exporting informally. So we put something in a suitcase and we run across the border with it. And then it's a big shock when we get our first order from somewhere in the world, and we now have to send a container using formal export documentation and become aware of not just the consumer who we are targeting in the market, but certain technical standards, certain regulations that apply to each and every market and actually are quite different for each product. So we have to have in mind who is the consumer. A big mistake that is often made is we say, where do you want to export to? Anybody who will buy anywhere in the world. So we don't pursue a targeted approach, and that usually ends up not being very efficient and actually being quite problematic. Because you have to, Dana spoke to doing research. Research is the underpinning not just of product design, but of everything in business and everything to do with export marketing. You have to go about a structured investigation of the market at different levels. I wanted to bring to the discussion this afternoon some data from UNCTAD. It's 2015 data, but it's just data that I could grab quickly without having to do a research project. So in 2015, the UNCTAD statistics on the creative economy valued the market, the global market for creative goods at something like US 510 billion. It's a little bit less than that, but just rounding it up, 510 billion US dollars. The segment called Arts Craft was valued at 35.7 billion US dollars, or roughly 7% of that overall market for global creative goods. The segment called Design Industries was valued at US $318.2 billion, so almost 9 times the value of the arts craft segment. And this was roughly 62% of the overall global market. So design industries like jewelry, fashion, interiors, they occupy a significant share of the global market for creative goods. And then there's another segment called visual arts, which I guess speaks to paintings and works of art, which was valued at 53.7 billion US dollars, or about 10% of the overall. Now, the moral of this story, there are quite a few things you can deconstruct from the data, but the moral of the story is that while in our context here locally, we view craft, art, and design as the same thing, and we throw it all in the same bag, and we say, whosoever will may come, please buy from us. When we are looking at export markets, there is a difference, and internationally, people see these segments as very different kind of animals. So visual arts is different from crafts, is different from design, and we have to make an effort to deconstruct what is the difference between these categories, because if you are offering your product as a craft product, the market has certain expectations. If you're offering it as an art product, the market has certain expectations. And similarly, if you're offering it as a design product, once you put design on something, there's a certain level of expectation. So I wanted to offer that to the discussion this afternoon very quickly, just to say that craft is essentially a cultural industry. And we overlook it because we are always focused on selling and commercial issues. But craft is in fact a facet of heritage, a facet of culture. So the gentleman who is in the Negril market carving, making wood carvings with red stripe beer, if he's still there, or the ladies who are in Treasure Beach weaving baskets from straw, they are involved in a cultural industry. And the argument for supporting and promoting that cultural industry is that it represents the authenticity of who you are. What is an authentic Jamaican product? It's one that has materials and input made in Jamaica, but also traditional skill. And very often persons have passed these traditional skills from generation. We have now second generation, well, I don't know about after COVID who's still standing, but we had at one point quite recently second generation basket weavers. And it's the same actually with pottery or any type of traditional skill. The skill moves from generation to generation. And in the absence of a deliberate attempt and effort to conserve that traditional skill and keep it going for future generations, that skill is generally being lost because we have an aging population of craftspersons. So it's very important to put craft in its proper perspective as a cultural industry needing support based on the validation of this can only be made in Jamaica by Jamaican people. Why? Because they are channeling their heritage, okay? Drivers of craft development, it's about linking it with tourism, it's about getting those skills into education, being sure that younger generations can learn and have access to that skill, archiving the skill, having it presented somewhere, on a historical basis so that future generations of designers can come and access knowledge on the process and on the products that were made in Jamaica 50 years ago. Okay? Production systems for craft are very much cottage production systems. People are making it on a cottage and a community level. So even though design industries globally, we say, okay, it's 60%, 62% of overall global creative change, therefore let's all jump into design industries. No, because if there's a concern for rural development, if there's a concern for employment, then we have to still look at maintaining traditional craft industries because the impact at the cottage and the community level is going to be greater than design products, which you probably will use technology to de-skill a good amount of the process and to meet the market standards. Design, on the other hand, is driven by innovation, the idea of something new. And so that novelty has to be nurtured because it's not easy to find something new in the world, but also it takes time. There's a process, there's a time for you to come up with a new product idea that hasn't been seen before, if you're not just copying somebody else's idea. And so that ideation process has to be supported very often by financing that does not exist, usually family, friends, or credit card. And so we need a lot of programs for people to be able to ideate and have the time to ideate new, fresh ideas. And we also need access to technology because most designers all around the world today are following things like 3D printing, laser cutting, actually even artificial intelligence, virtual reality. These are all things that will, even if we're not interested in using it in our products, they will shape the world of the future. And so we are not too small or too backward to start engaging with those ideas. So design is really driven by innovation, and the focal point of design is really solving a problem. It could be, the problem could be, what should a woman wear today? Or it could be, how do we harvest rainwater? All of that is design. The center of it is problem solving. And so that innovation framework and ecosystem has to be there to support design. Otherwise, you will find there are many people with very bright ideas who do not get out of the starting blocks. Okay? Now, in creative terms, actually, also for design, the technologies, I mentioned 3D printing and laser cutting, they are semi-industrial or industrial, as opposed to craft, where the main feature of craft is about making things by hand. And the element of the artisan making it by hand is what's going to give that item its value. Design is slightly different. Now, in creative practice, the categories are cross-fertilized. So craft people look at what designers are doing and they gain inspiration. Designers look at craft-based process. But in terms of export marketing, you have to know how you are projecting yourself. Are you projecting yourself as craft, a cultural item, or are you projecting yourself as design? Okay, and they each have different considerations. And I think those of us who are implementing capacity building programs have to be quite familiar with this difference, because the product development, the strategies for product development and the strategies to get outcomes vary depending on what we are talking about. And as I said before, for craft, the action is all at the cottage and the community level. So you have to build the capacity at the community level, not at one place in Kingston or Mobay. The capacity has to be built out at the level of the cottage and the community. Okay, so I hope that's a useful contribution. I'll stop there and let someone else speak.
We'll get into the lively discussion as we start going through some of the questions, but I'm going to now move to Laura. Laura, are you with me? Yes. And Laura is going to be speaking to us regarding youth designers driving innovation in Brand Jamaica. Laura's career has spanned the area of design, product development, and business development within the creative industries. She has spent over 20 years working in the areas of design, business development support, and mentoring. Laura has worked with agencies such as JAMPRO, Jamaica Business Development Corporation, and the International Trade Center. She also worked with UNESCO on World Heritage and Intangible Cultural Heritage projects. In 2012, Laura joined the teaching staff at the Edna Manley College and is currently the acting HOD of the Applied Arts Department. Her passion for the creative industries motivates her to use her expertise to create solutions that can drive sustainable development. Laura is married, a mother of four, and an entrepreneur. Laura is a graduate of the Edna Manley College and the University of West Indies, Mona. She holds a diploma in textiles and fiber arts, a BA in history, archaeology, philosophy, and an MA in heritage studies, all of which contextualizes the conversation that we are having today. Now, I know Laura has a passion for the youth and also a passion for getting to the place where we can definitively describe what do we mean by Brand Jamaica. And Laura, I want to start with that question. What do we mean by Brand Jamaica, and what role do the youth play in driving innovation in Brand Jamaica?
All right, so I want to start by really dissecting that Brand Jamaica. What is Brand Jamaica? And for me, I think we need to kind of hammer that out and have a clear meaning that's communicated at a national level as to what is Brand Jamaica. I mean, it really shouldn't only mean things that are fixed with the map or made in Jamaica. You know, for me, it needs a deeper meaning and understanding to the artists and designers who are in the space creating beautiful objects, you know, and art. It needs, for me, Brand Jamaica needs to speak to a high level of standard right across the board, regardless of the industry or the sector. And you know, when we're able to kind of narrow that down, then it's easy for me, like, you know, an educator in my classroom, to inspire my students, you know, about using Brand Jamaica, developing products that, you know, has that strong connection to Brand Jamaica. And I'll just expound on what I mean. So for example, if we're talking about Brand Jamaica related to textiles, that could look at the type of fabrics, the colors, the motif, you know, speaking to the authenticity. Lisa brought that up just now about authenticity, you know, what is authentic Jamaican? You know, what is that unique value proposition that we're saying when we talk about Jamaican textiles, for example? Yeah. Um, so when I have that kind of clear definition, you know, then when I go into the classroom, it's easier for me to say to my students, look to Jamaica as your inspiration. Because, you know, in the classroom, how it is sometimes we don't look within, we look outside first. So we look at what is happening in North America and in Europe, and we're inspired by that. But for me, that unique value proposition of what is Jamaica needs to come from a deep understanding that, look, man, Brand Jamaica means this. And so, as a student, as a designer, I mean, I look at Dana, for example, and I'm just so excited every time I go on her Instagram page of the imagery and the motifs that she's pulling from what I am so used to seeing, the fruits, the vegetables, you know, and I'm really inspired by that. If we think about Brand Jamaica, for example, in sports, and I'm going to go all over the place, so that's just where I am, for example. When I think of Brand Jamaica and I think of sports and I think of all the athletes who have done so phenomenal, what comes to me is about that spirit of determination and perseverance. You know what I mean? When I think of Brand Jamaica in food, I think of those kinds of tantalizing, those things that tantalize the senses. You know, it is spicy, it is sweet. You know, what is that taste? You know what I mean? And I really feel that that's one of the things we need to do, and communicate that at a national level, that everybody understands that Brand Jamaica is not just taking the flag to put on the product. Brand Jamaica is not just picking anything from anywhere and say I'm going to inscribe Jamaica, and I can trick the consumers to make them think that it's Jamaican. You know what I mean? So I know there's a deeper conversation that needs to be had on that, but I wanted to put that in the mix, right? The role of young designers. So I'm here, I am a lecturer here at Edna. I head up the Applied Arts department. Those departments include textiles, jewelry, ceramics, and of course, fashion. What does it mean? What does the role of designers in the gift and craft? Um, and I'd love to change, to not say craft only, but I'd like to say handmade. Yeah, because for me, I think yes, there's that traditional connection to craft, but sometimes I feel that there is this stereotypical thinking that when people say craft, you're talking about people who don't have there's no other alternative. They're not trained. And I think there needs to be some amount of energy that is put in shifting that mindset. Lisa spoke to that somewhat. And to understand that craft is as important as design is, you know. For my students to understand right here at Edna Manley College in my department that, look, it is no less of an art if you want to have a product in the craft realm of things. You know what I mean? And it's no less, and it's no higher if you're going to go to the design end. It's really about understanding the market, you know, and as I said, Lisa spoke to that, and understanding the value of each, also understanding the the economic value of each. We got some of those statistics from Lisa just now. Yeah. So they have an important role to play because they're the next generation. They're the ones, my students here, those who are trained, getting formal training, are the ones who will spearhead the kind of innovation that we need to see taking place in new products and services if you want to pull that in as well, right? And the fact that they're getting formal training means that we look towards them to change what we see, change the landscape, change the potential of these products and services that will come from these graduates. Hopefully, they all get engaged and have that passion for what they're doing going post Edna Manley College or whichever other institution they may be in. But it is important um, that their role is important because Lisa spoke about craft and that cultural connection. And I made some notes here that, they have to understand the seat of traditional craft. They have to understand the materials and the techniques. Because if they don't understand these materials and techniques, those traditions are going to die. If I don't have students who have an interest in understanding Jippy Jappa, yeah? And I'm not saying they have to be the ones who are doing the processing of this, but to understand that Jippy Jappa is one of those traditional materials that, we have done fabulous things with. I can think about Cecile Brown, over 40 years using Jippy Jappa in her products, which is continuously evolving as her children now take over the business. Yeah. So if we don't have them understanding that, then some of these traditions are going to die. And then we are going to be bombarded with things that we can't even connect with culturally. Or we may not be able to find the raw material to make these products because all of these raw materials may be coming from somewhere else. Yeah. And so if that happens, it disrupts the whole value chain for those kinds of traditional products and techniques that are unique to us. Um, should I stop here now? Because there are several other things. I'll allow you to pull in questions and then I'll continue.
Okay, well, you created a really perfect segue to our next panelist, Kris Jackson, who will be talking to us about blending contemporary designs and traditional art forms and culture. Kris, born into a family with a history and tradition in tailoring and design, Kris Jackson has style and creativity in her genes. After completing her first degree in sociology in Canada and spending a year working in Italy, her natural acclivity to all things fashion led her to enroll in a degree program at the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale. Since graduating therefrom, she has worked in a wide cross-section of fields and lent her talents to several creative outlets, most notably design and production of custom clothing for private clients, product development, event planning and decor, advertising, and design and production in the carnival industry. Since entering and winning the 2013 Heineken Inspire competition and going on to compete and getting to the top 3 in the Moda Grant competition, her journey and commitment to bettering the fashion industry in Jamaica led to embarking on a thus far 2-year journey in manufacturing. As co-owner of a small production house focused on quality locally made swimwear and activewear, she is committed to raising the standards locally to international levels. Armed with a determined work ethic, talent, and experience, she aims to make an impact on the Jamaican fashion industry and contribute to its further blossoming in the global arena in the 21st century. And having worked with Kris, I know that everything I just read is true and more. And Kris, I want to kickstart this segment of the dialogue based on something also that we identified in the case studies that we reviewed last week. And that is that the contemporary market for contemporary designs and goods, is perhaps one of the most attractive markets right now to get into. However, we are talking about Brand Jamaica, and Brand Jamaica is steeped in tradition and culture. So my question to you is, how do we blend contemporary designs while maintaining elements of the traditional art forms and the strength of the culture to drive innovation for export?
Okay. Thank you for having me. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Kris.
So, um, as the fourth speaker, everybody has kind of touched a little bit on a big part of that, and I kind of just go over a few of the points. For me, this topic is always at the forefront, even in my day-to-day business as a designer, as well as a product development consultant in manufacturing. I work with other designers closely, and one of the things that we have to do is kind of guide them in how to meld these two worlds, because we kind of end up encountering designers who they have a beautiful skill, but they don't necessarily know how to put their skill into what is going to be seen on the contemporary market and desired on the contemporary market. So first, Dana touched on it, Lisa touched on it, and Laura also touched on it. And I think it's going to be the theme that starts everything off when you're looking at design and anything to do with this type of creative industry, and it's research. It is the most important kind of first step into what you have to do. And really what we're looking at is, if you're looking at contemporary design, you have to then say to yourself, what exactly is contemporary design? What does that mean for your brand and your story? Because your brand is your story. And you have to decide how much of that you want to put into your story, how far into it you want to go. So for me personally, contemporary means it means now. It means now and as well as the future, and it's also timeless. So blending the two worlds, it's funny because looking around even at the display here, I can see where that's blended. And I'm gonna even just make a reference to Lisa's necklace, right? And you can see where it's a combination of ceramic, it's a combination of macrame, which is a traditional knotted art form, and it's a beautiful contemporary piece. And it's also a craft piece and a fashion piece at the same time. It's actually the perfect example of those two worlds melded. And that's kind of the direction that we want fashion and art and craft in the contemporary world to go, putting together pieces that somehow fit and go, So one of the other things, an important thing, is looking at the art form. So traditionally, art forms like, let's take crochet, for example. That is, I think, a very traditional, very strong art form in Jamaica that a lot of artisans use. And typically what we see is that they focus on a niche product. And they, grab onto this product and they perfect it. And it's beautiful. It's beautifully made, always, because the craftsmanship has normally been passed down, as Laura has said, or as Lisa had explained, passed down through generations. So they have this beautiful skill and it's been perfected, but hanging on to this niche product that doesn't necessarily fit into the market. So I think it's important where we look at artisans and we start to say to them, well, how can you shift your thought process? How can your product fit into the market? How can you shift how you create your product to fit into the market? So again, crochet and macrame are something that have two art forms that have made a huge comeback in the last 2 to 3 years, and they're very big in the traditional Jamaican scene. And how can we then push artists and designers to take this art form and broaden it? So broadening it into things like clothing, into things like lighting, furniture, all these things that we're seeing these traditional art forms being put into, you're seeing a lot of, because the bohemian thing is a trend right now, so we're seeing a lot of that being done. And we can also tap into that and pull on that in terms of a Brand Jamaica. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was collaborative design. So we often, this might be a little controversial to say, but not everyone is a designer. Not every artisan needs to be a designer. And sometimes we have to look at that and say, you know, as designers and as artisans, really figure out what our identity is in the space to be able to move forward. So if you are a very skilled artisan, but you don't necessarily have that design mindset, or you don't necessarily want to be in that design space, how collaborative design is a beautiful thing that you can engage in to then come up with some of the most wonderful products have been by two minds meeting, you know, a designer and an artisan who can put two things together, and that's where you have an amazing product, a saleable product. So yeah, I'm definitely a firm believer in collaborative design, because if it's like if you're building a house and you have an architect and an engineer, you need both. You know what I mean? You need both of them for different aspects of the piece. So yeah, some of the most beautiful products definitely born out of that, and utilizing that collaboration to kind of move forward and create that edginess in the pieces, and in that the contemporary pieces really need, that the market is now looking towards. Now going into the next thing, looking at, and Laura touched on this a lot, and I really, you know, I kind of made a note of what she was saying in terms of cultural inspiration. So in Jamaica, and Brand Jamaica is, we are a combination of a myriad of cultures, right? Our motto is out of many, one people. So we're going to have the Indo-Asian culture, we have the African culture, we have even our British culture, all of these things that come together that we can pull from. I think it's important for artisans to remember that, and to figure out how to insert that into their specific skill set and specific design point of view, cement that design point of view. Yes, so you want it to still be recognizable as your piece, but you want to know that, okay, you can see the cultural elements in it as well, because that is going to be what really, in terms of Brand Jamaica and having it stand out outside of Jamaica, you want it to still have that look. Pulling cultural inspiration, though, I want to kind of touch on a point of making sure that we understand and respect cultural appreciation versus appropriation. You know, so you're not just going to take, for example, in fashion, you're not just going to remake a sari and send it on the runway as a formal gown. You pull elements and you pay homage, and you have respect for the culture and in how you're inserting that into the piece. And I think in terms of, I think Laura will probably speak on this more, but I think that's a big thing that they're pushing in education. That's where that has to come in, you know, from the beginning, from the students learning, art students learning how to balance, how to create that balancing act in that case. The next thing I kind of wanted to talk about was Brand Jamaica really is, it's funny because I hear we're trying to define Brand Jamaica for me, and I'll tell you what I think it is, what it means for me. And we have to define Brand Jamaica, and we have to define contemporary to be able to pull the two stories together. Personally, and I think most people will agree that Brand Jamaica is our story. It is all our story. So we're talking about the cultural stories, the athletic stories, the natural stories. So you're looking at nature, you're looking at the people, you're looking at the food, you're looking at everything that we have all of these things that are so vibrant in our culture that we can insert into our art and into our design. Now, for me, I like to talk about the stories. So because I lean more towards fashion. Fashion is, Brand Jamaica is a feeling, and fashion is a feeling and a story. It's going to give you a certain, when you put on clothing, you want to feel a certain way. You want to make a certain statement. It is what people see when you walk into a room. So us incorporating these stories in unique ways through so many mediums, in the fabric, from the textile. I'm so happy that Edna Manley still teaches, you know, like traditional textile design. There's not a lot of places, even in my experience, in my education abroad, the focus was not textile. And I think the textile is a big part for Brand Jamaica with clothing. And illustrating these cultural stories and games in these textiles and in the silhouettes and in, you know, all the things that are incorporated in fashion and in craft. So for me, she touched on, Dana was talking about all her motifs that she uses in her ceramics, and it's the same type of thing. If you're looking at textile, using the motifs, you're illustrating maybe some elements from childhood games, some elements from childhood stories, things like Anansi, things like, all of these things that we can, and it can still be very contemporary, how it is done in terms of, so I'll say, so incorporating the colors of Brand Jamaica, which are distinct with clean lines and clean silhouettes. That brings it together. Incorporating, again, Jamaica is a lot more than the colors. So if you want to say, okay, you have a cleaner, if your style is clean, your style is more, like Dana said, when she started out doing all white because she was from a New York school. But you can still do have that same mindset and that same neutral tone, incorporating a lot of things that are traditionally used in Jamaican culture, like you're gonna look at like your curry shells, and you're gonna look at your jonker beads, and you're gonna add those elements and those embellishments to the pieces to give them that Jamaican feel and that Jamaican flair and that distinct Jamaican look. So unexpected art forms mixed with contemporary shapes, so you even turning things like our woodwork into jewelry, or ceramics, as I pointed out with your necklace there, our ceramics into jewelry, are elevating existing items and existing pieces with traditional traditional embellishments. I think that when done correctly and done beautifully, it can be, incredible what we can do. And I'll tell you about an experience I had working with JBDC, which, as Janine mentioned, years ago, I used to work here, and we used to go around the island, and we used to do these trainings with artisans. And I've met so many amazing artisans. And for us, it was sometimes shocking. Some of the skill level was so great and so beautiful, but they didn't quite know what to do with it. So one of the things we did was we said, okay, we're going to insert some understanding of a little bit of, and they may not have been like designers, at heart, but it's funny what you can pull out of people, because some of them went on to be very proficient in terms of with design, just by implanting that seed to them that, listen, you don't only have to make these little round baskets from straw. You can make beautiful chunky bracelets that are in style, just showing them things, igniting that flame in their mind that there are different things you can make and different things you can spin. So that was a lot of what we went around and did, and it was such a rewarding thing to see them start to understand blending those two worlds, and even incorporating the colors, dropping the colors into the straw, doing things like home decor things with the straw, beautiful place settings that are very contemporary and very usable and saleable. So I'll stop there, and I will I'll just say, so in conclusion, Brand Jamaica really is, in terms of the contemporary design, it's putting together contemporary with what our traditional stories, and to give that, to still maintain that feeling, but to show the clean lines and for it to be saleable and, exportable and make that money.
That's right. I mean, I'm just fascinated. I had to remind myself, oh yes, I'm moderating. I should actually be trying to figure out what my next questions are. But it's a fascinating dialogue, and one that I'm really hoping persons are paying attention to, because what we want at the end of the day is that we want to be able to translate this discussion to activation. Yes, we are talking about ideation, innovation, but more importantly, how do we activate it? And so, Dana, I would like to come back to you now with a question, because we are talking about Brand Jamaica, we're talking about the element of design, and at the end of the day, we're talking about export and going into international markets. And one of the things I am encountering recently with the use of the Things Jamaican brand, when speaking to international presenters, we are being told that there needs to be some sort of interpretation of the products that we are putting out so the persons can understand what the unique selling proposition is coming out of Jamaica. I know that in your designs you are using motifs that are culturally relevant, specific to our local context. And I also know that you have been able to tap into the market, international market, and they understand it. What goes into that interpretation? How do you communicate it?
Okay, so I guess everybody on the panel is big on research and understanding your customer. I think what it is that I have an understanding that not every customer is going to love every product that I do, and they will not understand the importance of the breadfruit. Okay, so I may have a collection that is more in tune with not just Jamaican, but national of a tropical country. I don't think of my products as just for Jamaicans, but it is inspired by our culture. So I have a variety of products in my product line, things that appeal to maybe a tourist, somebody who is more culturally aware. I know who my customer is. So if I have a meeting with, say, Bloomingdale's, I will not present to them the breadfruit collection. I may present to them the bowl from the collection because it's sculptural, and I know it may appeal to someone who's looking for a serving dish or a serving platter. I'll present to them a banana leaf platter instead of a breadfruit plate, because a platter, everybody knows what a banana leaf is, and it will appeal to them. So there are certain products that I know that will be more in tune with an American customer or a European customer. So you know, when you have an understanding who your customer is, you won't design exactly for them, but you will make certain adjustments to your design to appeal to that customer. Now, on my website, I've spent a lot of time building a very engaged following on Instagram. A lot of them are Jamaicans, but I do have the US-based customers and people in Europe, a few in Europe, who actually understand some of the pieces and they love the aesthetic. The pieces that I design, I try not to pigeonhole myself. I
Think we have lost Dana. Okay.
feel that I design in such a way that it can appeal. Hear me?
Yes, we're hearing
Did
you
you
now.
lose me for a second?
We lost you a bit.
Sorry. Sorry, a call came in. I had to just cancel it. Sorry about that. So yeah, I try to design in a way that appeals to a wide cross section of people. So the piece can fit in a Jamaican home, in a European home, American home, Canadian home. I try to design in such a way. The conversations we touched on, you know, contemporary design or a more modern aesthetic. I consider my pieces to be more modern, but they do have, it's a modern interpretation of the things that are culturally significant to me as I, you know, being a Jamaican, growing up in Jamaica and in rural Jamaica. So some of my pieces, I will say that I pay attention to what are international standards or what the trends are. I don't design based solely on trends. I'll be aware of them, but still stay true to what I love and what I want to do. And it's so funny, a lot of the times the colors that I choose tend to align with color trend reports, like the breadfruit green that I've been using for the past year and a half. Next year it's slated to be the color of the year or a trendy color. And you see it in fashion right now, that deep green, leafy green color that we see in nature around us. It's going to become very big next year. And so I find that staying true to who I am tends to align with what's going on internationally, because I'm paying attention to what people are doing internationally. Now, even though I pay attention to what is happening internationally, I still take things in the culture and I do it in such a way that it may appeal to the customer overseas. So even though I do have things that are culturally significant, I know that I also create things that may appeal to someone else. And the colors that I choose are not specific to one type of consumer. It also appeals to I don't want to say I don't want to say that, you know, where it's Jamaican or not, because I think the colors Jamaicans do look, my colors are a little bit more, I wouldn't say muted. They're more tropical and bright. It's not a lot of the Jamaicans tend to like deep reds and yellows and very bright colors. And I don't want to say that my designs don't have bright colors, but I think they're a little bit softer, and that's easier for a lot of people to integrate into their homes and what they have already. So I think because I try to stay on top of and I expose myself to a lot of design that's going on out there, it's easier for me to be able to design in that way. And then also have an understanding of what my customer is looking for. I tend to either, if I'm dealing with a buyer, I present the products that I think are relevant to them. But then I also am not afraid to explain the significance or my design process so that they understand the story behind a breadfruit or a banana leaf, or why I did a box drink or a lion of Judah, or explain the Caribbean princess. Like each one of those items, there's a story behind it. And I make sure that I tell the story. I engage my following on Instagram, and I definitely tell that story on my website. So a lot of the storytelling and the information gets translated. So the person that is a little bit more culturally savvy or well-traveled, or they have a love for Jamaica, it will connect with them a little bit more. So I think it's important that we also, the way in which we talk about our products and market our products makes it easier for it to be accepted globally and for people to have a deeper appreciation for what makes us Jamaicans, and or makes, you know, our culture the way, you know, as loved as it is. So I think the way we tell the story as well is just as important as how we design and how we produce and the products that we make.
Great. So if what I'm hearing is, it's while we have an understanding of where we are coming from, we still need to connect and communicate it in such a way that it is globally understood, because we tend to
Yes.
be so well caught up in what Brand Jamaica is, and we feel that the world understands it. But the truth is, when they are buying something that is relevant to them,
To
and you
them,
have
you're
to
correct.
connect to those two dots. So thank you for that, Dana. Definitely an important, um, the need to understand that is important, because we are communicating with a diverse set of persons in the market space. And so, you know, we tend to be too caught up with our own selfness. So, Laura, I wanted to touch a little bit on, we spoke about, now we have graduates coming out of Ednaman. We have a number of young entrepreneurs coming into the space with their own designs. And we're saying that perhaps what we see happening is that the younger generation is very good at design and very good at conceptualizing, but perhaps not as technically sound with production. How do we bridge the gap between the ability to design with the ability to produce? How do we pull those two persons in the value chain together? If Laura is with me.
Yes, I'm here. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
I'm going to start with two scenarios. Two things of the past. The late Norma Soares, bless her soul, was one of those designers I know, because I was a student at the time, who would come to the college and would definitely seek out the young textile designers, and she would engage them to develop fabric designs for her to use in her commercial collections. And that for me was significant because as a student, you could now you have that field to play and to design and to conceptualize. But what Norma brought to the table was, okay, I give you that free reign. However, you're now designing with a market, a target in mind. And what it was a lot of work, a lot of trial and error. But what it did for a lot of my colleagues who engaged with Norma was it took them out of that realm of just being in design and I'm the artist and I can do, but now working within a kind of a structure that says, there it has to be ready by a certain time, it has to be done in a certain way, it has to, you know, the design stops and no, we think about the production and it has to be efficient because she needs 10 yards or 20 yards or 100 yards, you know what I mean? So that helped for us as students then to understand that production commercial side. Because while you're in college, while you're in school, you're just you're not thinking about any market. That's not the purpose of being at school. You're being as creative as you can be. Another model that I thought worked and worked well for the ceramics industry was Wasi Art. Wasi Art was located in St. Anne's, big studio, ceramic studio, and there were several students and graduates from Edna who would end up whether being interns or working in Wasi. Again, that provided a space where you could see production at a certain level. You could still be creative, but you could see a process of commercialization. Yeah. And I think that is an important part of the process for graduates at Edna. Not everybody who leave the School of Art are going to be practitioners. Not all of them are going to be entrepreneurs. What is for sure is that they'll all have to find a way to survive. They have to find a mechanism. Yeah. For those who want to go into entrepreneurial endeavors, they kind of, some of us learn the hard way. We take some leaks. You learn by the way. One of the good things now is for us at the college is, that very business approach. So we're using different methods. There's a business of art and design class, there's engagement in the business model competition, and soon to be the launch of the EMC SBDC that will help the students to understand that business side, and to create that balance between creativity and profitability, right? So I just wanted to put that out there because that is important for students. A lot of our students, they're going to take the first job that comes to them, and it might not be, they spend 4 years to get the degree, but the reality is, the economics, and so they're going to take a teaching job or whatever. But we need more, maybe it's more internships. We need more designers who are established designers, that is, who are coming and engaging with students. We also need the students to be going out and engaging with them. That's Kris spoke about the collaboration, and that is just going to be such a key ingredient in these young designers going out and finding their footing in the space. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I like the fact that Kris said, we're going to be at different, not everybody is going to be the designer. There are some of us who will have to be behind the scenes. And that's one of the things about being in art school, you know. We're all here and we're like, yes, man, I'm going to be the next whoever, the great artist, the great designer. But the reality is, not all of us are going to be the successful designers. Not all of us are going to be on the front line. And I think if more of our students understand what are you really good at, yeah, then we can better create a value chain where trained, formally trained individuals can see themselves along a value chain. And they don't have to be at the forefront. They don't have to be the stars. You know, when I think of fashion, for example, the pattern maker is such a crucial part of that value chain in fashion. It's not just what we see on the runway and the final product and the designer coming out and taking a bow. Yeah. It's that team behind that designer who helps to make that happen, right? And I think for me, my students have to understand that um, what are you good at? What are you good at? And it might not be making. You know, Dana spoke about that. The designer doesn't have to be the maker necessarily. Yeah. There may be some students who come out who are more technically sound than some students. And so they may be the ones behind the designer who is upfront, but still feeling not feeling, you know, like, oh well, I'm not getting the limelight, but understanding that they're playing a very pivotal role in that value chain. Yeah. I don't even know if I answered your question, but that for me is important. And as I said, I think where we're at now, and because we're encouraging that entrepreneurship in universities, right? We need to have a kind of we need more incubator spaces, for example, because the graduates from Edna, some of them, a large percentage of them, will not be able to invest in the machinery and equipment that they will need to continue their practice. It might be easier for a painter, yeah, because they have their canvas, they have, you know, you can set that up. But someone who is going to print textiles, for example, we need at least an 8-foot table to set up you know, your printing thing, or if you're going to use technology, you need to bring in some digital printing machine. The ceramics people are going to need a kiln. And the truth be told, straight fresh out of college, you may not have that kind of money to invest in that right now. So incubator spaces can help those young designers continue to fuel that passion. Because for me, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the college now when I say this, but for me, too many of my graduates leave and they're not engaging in their passion. They're not engaging in that thing that they've invested 4 years in the college. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing enough innovation and new products in the market, because too few of my graduates or our graduates are engaging in the space to transform what handmade looks like, what contemporary design looks like, what craft looks like. Yeah. So incubator spaces, I feel, is going to be critical. Engaging with people who are already in the business, whether it's designers or, you know, ceramic artists, mentoring, internships with them, volunteering, so that they can understand this balance between, yes, design, but look, we're working towards a specific market, we're working towards a specific price point. So there comes a point when design has to stop and we move now through the other processes to make this profitable.
Mhm. Thank you, Laura. Excellent response. I segue now to Lisa because there is a school of thought that says in order for us to really tackle export, the aspect of manufacturing and scaling may not be possible locally. So what I want to know is, if the artisan then considers coming up with a design and having it manufactured overseas, how does that affect Brand Jamaica, and how does that affect the authenticity of the product when it is finished, and how do you bridge that need now to look at scaling and exporting?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Um, so the issue, just to weigh in a little bit on the issue of Brand Jamaica, branding for me always connotes a notion of consistency and therefore some sort of regime of standards or values. And one thing I would recommend is that this is something that I think requires a brainstorming of the brightest minds. I agree with Laura, and I also agree with Kris that Brand Jamaica is a composite of all our stories. But I think as far as exporting, because Brand Jamaica is a mega brand, having lived in different places of the world, the potential is mega in the sense that it's a cool brand. It's got that cool factor that young people go for. It's got that cool factor that old people like me go for.
The mic.
Sorry, it's got that cool factor that old folks like me go for. It's got that cool factor that appeals to young people. We have a huge diaspora that could potentially be engaged. So I'd recommend a brainstorming to really get the best minds around the table in terms of what's the value system we want to project in terms of export. Now, you asked about production overseas. Again, that's very logical and very common nowadays. Things like print on demand sites, production overseas, we're all looking at it as designers, or at least persons who want to be commercially viable, because one of the things with the Caribbean is once you get into the transportation and the logistics costs, it kind of defeats you in the sense that even if you're using a very readily available local material like paper or ceramic, that you can make it lightweight, but then once you start looking at transportation and logistics, immediately you have to look at scaling. So I think this is a very interesting question. Actually, in terms of manufacturing overseas, though, that is part of the design services, or what it's called is the digitally delivered services. It's not really about goods, it's more about services, because then you're giving the design here to be made overseas. That's a mega market globally. It's something like 2.7 trillion US dollars in 2017. So that's a mega market, and we should look at that. As far as production in Jamaica and government policy support, what we articulated in the craft policy is that authentic Jamaican craft is any traditional cultural expression, craft, artisanal product, visual art, fine art, souvenir, or craft-based design, which is, and there's a series of criteria, which includes the fact that it's comprised of raw material components originating solely from Jamaica, use natural, modified, or semi-processed state as an input to production, otherwise utilizing at least 51% Jamaican raw material, or if the principal raw material is not made in Jamaica, which has at least 70% local input, and at least 70% of the cost of production must be incurred in Jamaica. So there's a question about value when you play around with figures. It could be that I do a design that costs me $2 to manufacture overseas, but I'm adding the value by creating a design here to make it a $200 product, in which case the value is being added here. And so revenues would, providing I'm tax compliant, revenues would redound to the government from my operation here. So it's a question of eligibility according to criteria. You have to set these kind of standards. Businesses to be viable will have to play around with manufacturing overseas or manufacturing here. But as far as the government's policy support is concerned, I would recommend that this definition, which was done through a lot of consultation, by the way, with the craft policy, it wasn't I came up with, we consulted with a number of specialists, including the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office, which has a very deep, rigorous understanding of intellectual property issues. And we came up with this definition in the craft policy. So as far as where the government focuses its limited resources, I think it still has to be on authentic Jamaican products. But I think businesses have to look at manufacturing overseas as a strategy. It's logical. It's the way the world is going. It's a $2.7 trillion market for digitally delivered services. that was in 2017. So I hope I answered what you
Yes.
were saying.
Yes.
Yes. As far as the question, though, was posed in, because I remember thinking everything is possible with God. The question was posed in the negative to say we cannot. Okay? And I think there's a lot of things that we haven't exploited that are very simple things. So I said in our last roundtable seminar that I think a skills database is something that could be very easily transformative without costing a lot of money. Where are the skills that emerge from Edna Manley College every year? Where are the persons who are self-trained, who are studying overseas, who have studied in Italy or America? We need these people to all be in a skills database where we can see samples of their work, we can see what skills they have, and so persons who are looking for persons to produce for them can make these linkages. And we have a way in Jamaica and the Caribbean of setting up databases and no one can access it. I cannot for the life of me understand what the rationale of that is. We need a publicly accessible database which can say who is doing textiles, who is doing metals, who is trained and trained in what, who is self-taught but is coming up with brilliant, radical ideas that could change the future. Can I, as a designer, go somewhere online? And actually, that can fuel exports too, because people all over the world are looking for people to produce. People all over the world are saying, where's the next best talent coming from? And they're looking at Brazil, they're looking in South Africa. So I think a skills database that is publicly accessible could really be transformative in terms of export, and I don't think it will cost a lot of money. So I would like to view the future of design and creativity and Brand Jamaica from a positive space. I know that I am maybe almost 30 years in the process of industrial development, and you do see things going around and coming around, the same ideas, the same people going around, and you do sometimes lose hope. But I think right now we're on the cusp of a big opportunity. I think COVID has changed the world. I think excellence can come from anywhere. Creativity can come from anywhere. As I said, Brand Jamaica is a mega cool brand. Do we ourselves believe it? I'm not too sure, because sometimes we fight against each other, and the person that we should be looking for is the person out there who's coming on a ship and can take our ideas. If you are trained to deconstruct design, you can look at an idea and deconstruct it and even make it better and have it 3D printed in 24 hours. So we need to really focus on collaboration, on the simple low-hanging fruit that we could just get that going with a little bit of money. And we need to think about cross-fertilization, because that's how creativity works. Yeah?
Thank you.
Thanks.
One of the things I heard you mentioning, Kris, is I think the term you used was design collaboration or something like that.
Collaborative design.
Collaborative design, pardon me. Well, I know that one of the case studies that was published in the business dialogue that we sent out earlier this year spoke about the example of Donna Karen's collaboration with Haitian artisans. And Lisa, you just touched on it, that international designers are looking for local, not just local talent, but local art forms, and blending all of that together for trendy contemporary designs that are supported with world-renowned brands. Give us a sense of how that works, because I think that's another opportunity for us to tap into.
Yes, the skills database. I just need to go back to that for a minute. That is key, and that's something that I think is so needed and so and missed and will help in this endeavor as well, as you said, Janine. But yes, how blending that would work. Essentially, it's the same thing as you say. It's cross fertilization. So Jamaica provides inspiration already for many of these designers. You see the Christian Dior with the Rasta bags, and you see all these big designers with you see the Tommy Hilfiger with the mesh merino that Jamaicans been wearing from time memorial. You know what I mean? And not thinking anything of it, and turning this into high fashion and turning this into something that people crave and putting Rihanna in her video and things like that. So we're already providing them with the inspiration, but we're not benefiting from our cultural vibrancy and our cultural swagger, really, you know. So that cross fertilization will provide that, and having access to the people who can provide that to them will do that. Now, in terms of the technicalities of blending it, the sky is the limit. There's really no formula for how it's to be done. It really just is a meeting of two minds and creative collaboration that will push that. So if you're looking at something like, I'll give you an example of, so currently I mostly wear my manufacturer's hat. I have a few different hats that I wear. I have the teaching hat, I have the designer hat, I have the manufacturer's hat, which I wear mostly now. And designers come into our small production house. I have a partner, and we sit with them and we take them through the process of, some of them come in, they don't even know how to sketch, but they have an idea and they want help to make this idea a reality. And it's fashion, we do fashion and accessories. So they come in, they have an idea, they explain what it is, and we take them through the process from beginning to end. And there are times when we've had designers come in who they're very keen and very enthusiastic, and they have some ideas, but they spend too much time on looking internationally. And we kind of, one of the things we do is try to kind of pull them back to themselves, pull them back to Jamaica. And I always say to them, okay, what does this say about you? What does this say about your brand? What does this speak to? Why is it that you want to create this piece? Because a lot of time they bring reference images, especially if they can't sketch, they bring reference images from Pinterest and from here and there. And I say, listen, that's nice, and that's nice for there. But what does this speak to about you? What does this say about your brand? How are you inserting yourself into this? What element are you pulling from your culture, from your lifestyle, from your soul, really, because that's what design is about, that you're putting into your piece. So that's a part of what it's about, pulling from what we have available to us and putting it together. So as you say, if you're having an international designer who's looking to collaborate or looking to find an artisan to make for them, and there we have so many opportunities for that. You look at the people who do the crochet and the macrame. You can mix crochet and macrame with so many clothing items in a very trendy, very contemporary, cool way. In little small elements. You're looking at the sculptors who do woodwork. Woodwork and clothing actually can go together beautifully. We have all kinds of, when you're looking at clothing with hardware, belts, the hardware on dresses, you have kind of a sculptural piece on the shoulder of a dress. You have macrame in the back of a dress falling down. As you turn around, you see that element in the back. There's so many ways that we can incorporate it. Really, the sky's the limit. It's for us to understand that there are these possibilities. And like what Laura was saying, there's so many skilled and talented artists coming out of the schools that are not utilizing their skill because they don't have the opportunities to maybe provide these skills to other designers or to other artisans. And I think maybe what we need to start teaching, not only do we need to start teaching that in the business side of things, but we need to start teaching about collaboration. And where that starts off to is that we need to explain to designers and artists that they need to come down a little bit from their ego and understand that it's okay for two people to come together and either get 50% of the credit or even one person to be in the background, So I personally set aside my designer hat for the last 2 years. I haven't really been designing. I haven't been pushing my personal brand because I wanted to help other designers who I'm blessed and lucky enough to have a rounded education in fashion. I can make a piece from start to finish. I don't actually need another person to do anything for me. So for me, it was important to start utilizing that knowledge and trying to impart it to other designers and trying to help them, the designers who don't do pattern making, the designers who can't sew. In our small production house, that's one of the things that we do. And we hope to grow it to a bigger space to be able to offer more and more services to then even eventually connect these designers with other people who they can collaborate with. As we say, that database, that not just the database in terms of online that you can just access, but that real physical connection. That if I have this access to look at that database and say, well, a designer came into me and she has these beautiful pieces, but they don't really work on their own. Is there a designer that has pieces that are lacking something, that need something else? Can we put them together? You know, all of these things,
Wow.
that's the direction we need to start going in, and it has to start from the education. I have a couple of interns who come in from time to time. They mostly came in to start working on Carnival, because we also we are pushing and believing in bringing back the Carnival production side of things to Jamaica. We have a massive Carnival. It's a massive opportunity and financial opportunity for a lot of artists, a lot of students who are talented but don't have the opportunities in that industry. We're trying to pull it back to Jamaica to show that we don't need to go to a Trinidad, we don't need to go to a China to make our Carnival costumes or our things. We can actually produce them quite competently here. And so some of the interns that we have that come in, who they work on some of the pieces and they start to learn how costumes go together, you know, and how costume design can relate to their brand, and how they can implement that into their pieces and embellish. And it's such an eclectic mix of things that we can do in the creative industries, and that's kind of one of the things that we need to push. That's the direction we need to go in, you know, and also get them to recognize that that is available here.
Right, right. Wow. This I figured more or less when I started fielding some of the ideas I had for this discussion to the panelists, and they started to respond to me that this was going to be an explosive conversation, that we would never be able to cover the full gamut of it in one sitting. But I certainly hope that we would have tantalized the minds to look at the industry in a more expansive way. I mean, we are really pigeonholing it into this box, and it's not going to take us very far if we keep it there. We're talking about exports. We're talking about diversifying markets. We're talking about Carnival. I'm not sure how many producers in the gift and craft industry recognize themselves within the Carnival industry. You know, so the cross-fertilization, how do we attract big brands to come here and produce? How do we collaborate? How do we really leverage on Brand Jamaica? And I think that was the essence of what we wanted to bring about, that we have this brand. It is a very powerful brand. It has a uniquely recognizable element globally. It's amazing that such a little dot on a map could attract so much attention. Yet, we are not reaping the economic benefits of it. And we certainly believe that within the creative industries, that is the area, first and foremost, that it can happen. And we certainly believe that the gift and craft industry has a critical role to play in expanding its vision and to get into the place where we can say, yes, Jamaica has a booming gift and craft industry. So as we can't we can't go any further. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask each of my panelists to just give me a summation of, you know, what would they like to see in terms of the next steps, because we really want to go into activation mode. So Dana, I'm gonna give you your opportunity to just close with us with just a one or two next steps that you think should be taken to move this industry forward.
Oh my. That's gonna one or two steps. Okay, so I am forever harping on e-commerce and the assistance from the government in making sure that there is some support for an industry for e-commerce. A lot of us, we make things, but it's too difficult to get our product to market. And for me, I have found, I would say, a decent amount of success trading online, having my own website, being able to sell my products to a US market, So I would say that for the industry to move forward, we need to, one, stop thinking of the craft, gift, souvenir design industry as a roadside hustle. There needs to be a change of perception. I don't remember which panelist did say that there, you know, the way in which people view craft is because you don't have anything else to do. So that's why you end up in that industry, which is not true. We import millions of dollars of craft items from China and India. And so somebody's making a lot of money from selling craft, making and selling craft. So therefore, I think there needs to be a realization and appreciation for that. And then also to empower the artisans and the designers and the makers to be able to sell their product through e-commerce. And those would be my 2 points.
Thanks, Dana. Lisa.
Okay, so I took a few bullet points out of the National Craft Policy and Strategy. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to pick the key ones. I think in terms of developing trade and export, we have to recognize the reality that as individual producers, makers, businesses, will not be successful, because one of the things people look at in the export market is, does that country have a reputation for production? Do they have a reputation for design? Do they have a reputation for original work? Now, we do have a reputation for original ideas and original creativity, but we don't have a reputation for production. So again, I go back to this skills database. It's very important for us to begin to cross-fertilize linkages on the local level and open up the thing so people know who's doing what and what skills are there that I can use. Not only businesses, but what skills are there, whether it's marketing, social media, technical production, design. So we need that open database. It's a fact that there is a need for seed grants to support product development. If we look at other countries, design grants, now they are administered on a competitive basis, so it's not a handout. You have to enter like competitions, but they are frequent competitions. If we look at, for example, the UK, there are many design competitions, many grant schemes that young producers, old producers, self-taught people who are trained can get into a competitive bidding to get some seed financing to get their ideas off the ground. And it's very important. Unfortunately, because of our history and our culture, we think that grants is like a handout and we're giving somebody something. You're giving someone a leg up to begin a creative activity that can influence the world and can support other producers, that can drive tourism. There's no, as Kris said, it's unlimited, it's endless. So we need that seed financing. We need duty-free concessions for raw material inputs, because again, by the a lot, even if you are using, for example, local clay, you have to import glazes. So by the time you bring in things with duty, your product is going up like that. And so it's a matter of cost structures. We do need incentives for raw material imports. We do need incentives for equipment, machinery, and technology. So the software, the hardware, the 3D printers, we need to kind of free up this thing and stop having it as a dirty little secret. I know that there are some concessions being administered by one arm of the government, but it's who knows about it, and it's kind of a dirty little secret, and I won't tell you. We need to kind of free up this thing if we are to move forward and have people not moving production to New York, where they give you an incentive to come and just do business in New York. If we don't want to see businesses and creativity migrating, we have to bring a parallel level of incentives here to get the production going and the ideation going. I also think when we did the craft policy, we found out that there's no standard or origin certification for what is made here. So there's no made in Jamaica branding. There's no separation of someone importing something and labeling it Jamaica versus something that is made here according to the guidelines we've established in the craft policy. It's important for us to look at that labeling standard. It is something that requires technical expertise. It requires JIPO and Bureau of Standards to weigh in. But in the absence of that made in Jamaica certification and labeling, it's difficult again to distinguish what is yours from what is coming from outside and is labeled or pretending to be yours. And the fact is, a lot of Jamaican products are of incredibly high quality. So some things that are made here, you probably wouldn't even know they are made here. So we need that labeling standard, and we need that authentic Jamaican craft kind of craft design some sort of intermediary certification with a stamp on it. And this is something that is done by other countries to carve out the space for imports. It's something that allows our trade authorities to take action, because we can't actually do anything about products coming from elsewhere labeled made in Jamaica unless there is a standard enacted in our national laws. So I think that's pretty important. And I think linkages with other sectors, tourism, agriculture, retail incentives for purchasing authentic Jamaican products should also be enacted. And I encourage everyone to try to get a hold of the National Craft Policy. It is 5 years old, but there's a bunch of things in there that I think we should work together to advocate for everyone who has an interest in this sector.
Thank you, Lisa. Laura, hand over to you for your 2 next steps.
Is that for me, Janine? I got logged off a bit.
Yes, your closing
Okay.
remarks.
Okay, so I endorse all that has been said, and Lisa has really done quite a bit on some of those key ones. I just want to leave something food for thought. I know there's always a focus on export, but I also think we need to look at some of the needs of the local and regional markets. Because I think if we get that right, then it makes it a lot easier for individuals within the gift and craft industry to move to the exports, right? I think we have a lot of skills and talent that we can look internally for those customers. To do great products, because I still see a lot of beautiful things, as Lisa said, that's imported and it's being sold. And I would love to see more of our local products being bought by our local customers, and regional customers. So that's just something I just want to put out there. But definitely more collaboration, definitely more relationship building, because we can't do it alone. We cannot do it alone. And we have to move past that mindset that I have to be the head cook and bottle washer. We cannot move our industry forward with that kind of mindset. And so that for me is and people need to continue following the passion. Follow the passion. And if you have the drive and the passion for what you're doing, yes, you will find the resources to move it along. And with the support, the incentives that Lisa speaks about, it will come. But we need individuals to still be passionate about this industry, change the mindset about, it is, people who have nothing to do or have less education or whatever. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry between craft, design, whatever. It's big business. And we need to see it and actually start looking at it as a business and not just, a thing I do on the side because I couldn't get, the job I wanted or whatever. Yeah, because it's big business. So let's treat it that way.
Thank you very much. Kris.
Yes, absolutely. I second that point. My first point was going to be the mindset. So I'll just expand on what Laura was saying. Is changing the mindset in the industry. That, as she said, it's something that you do if you don't have anything else to do, or you did dance, or because I've definitely had that via an insinuation before. So yeah, shifting that mindset within each portion as well too. As you said, that you don't have to be the overall person, that there is a place, particularly I'll speak to fashion, there is a place for a pattern maker, all around the world, in places where if you go to New York, pattern makers make a lot of money. It is a key skill in the fashion industry, and we don't look at it like that here, and we need to start looking at what the opportunities are within each of the industries that we can pull from. So that was one of my first points. As it speaks to Brand Jamaica, though, particularly, keeping the traditional art forms alive through blending them with contemporary. So what's going to happen is if we don't look outside of some of these niche products that we've always been making, the things that we've always been doing, that people aren't necessarily being drawn to, the art forms are going to die. However, if we make it clear that you can blend these art forms with these contemporary ideas, and people are drawn to them and they start to sell, the art forms will then be, there will be a reigniting of the passion towards the art forms, you know? So it goes hand in hand. And I think that's something that we really need to look into. So even, you know, seeking out these people who have these skills and putting them in a space where you can say, okay, listen, can you teach these 25 young people how to do this? You know, how can we find these people and get them into spaces where they have the ability to do that? Pass it on. And then we say, okay, and this is what we're going to use it for. And this is how we're going to keep it going and keep it growing. And then my final point was to manufacturing quality. I think in a lot of the areas in gift and craft, the quality is amazing. And, you know, I think for me personally, when you look at some of the sculpture and some of the ceramics coming out of Jamaica and coming out of Jamaican artisans, it's unmatched. I think that we need to get to that place. I'll speak particularly to fashion. We need to get to that place with fashion as well. There isn't a standard of quality. There isn't really a standard or understanding of quality there. The same thing with labeling practices, the same thing with finishing. And a part of it is that we don't have production houses, we don't have manufacturing houses, and we don't have equipment and things set up and people who have the know-how who are available to pass on this knowledge and make sure that the skills are being preserved. And the quality checks, the quality control checks, you know, and understanding what the level of quality needs to be for it to be at an international standard. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
For all products, yes.
Yeah.
And for all products that seek to leverage on Brand Jamaica, because if what I'm hearing, what I'm hearing is that we need to come up with a branding guide for Brand Jamaica right across all industries that explains what the elements are and how we communicate it. And certainly with that in mind, we would have to look at quality right across the board, not just gift and craft, because even in tourism, when we talk about Brand Jamaica, if there's a defect there, it affects the brand,
Right.
just like with any other firm and any other brand.
Because this is a privilege.
It's a
to be able
privilege to use
say
it.
that your product is representative of Brand Jamaica.
Exactly.
So it should show that. You know,
Yes.
it should live up to the standard.
Yes, yes, definitely. Well, ladies, I want to say thank you to our panelists. We would not have been able to have this afternoon without volunteering your time and your immense skills and experience in the industry. We have over 100 years sitting around this in this panel, and if combine it, and certainly the dialogue is going in the direction that we want it to be. We really want to stop having conversations about craft in that sort of very pigeonhole type of conversation. We want to take it to the world. We want to take Brand Jamaica to the world, and it's going to require this type of dialogue, these types of expertise, this type of mindset that we're talking about to move it forward. So on behalf of JBDC, I would like to thank you, panelists. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kris, for dedicating this time with us. And just to remind our listeners that tomorrow we close Global Entrepreneurship Week with our Entrepreneur's Journey feature, where we will be having interviews with our 4 finalists for the JBDC Boss Man and Boss Lady 2020. And we have some thriving businesses that were able to look 2020 in the eye and still be classified as successful growing business, which is one of the criteria, and have been nominated as finalists in the Boss Man and Boss Lady competition. So we will be coming back here tomorrow at 12 noon for those interviews and the award ceremony, which will take place at 1 p.m. Join us on Zoom. Look at our social media for all the links. You know how we do in 2020 with COVID. It's not meet us here. We'll soon meet up again, man. No worry yourself. But for the time being, it's going to be virtual, and we invite you all to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining JBDC this afternoon. Have a great day.